Welcome back to Whispers of the Guilty, where we delve deep into the shadows of true crime and uncover the chilling stories that haunt our world. Tonight, we journey to the quiet town of Mississauga, where the Chen family seem to live a life of suburban bliss. Their home, nestled at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac, was the epitome of tranquility. But behind the facade of normalcy, a storm was brewing. Linda Chen, a devoted nurse, and her husband Peter, a respected engineer, had built a comfortable life for their children, Alice and Kevin. On the surface, everything appeared perfect. Yet beneath this veneer of harmony, tensions simmered. Strains in their marriage and the pressures of daily life began to erode their once strong bond. The evening of June 15th, 2019 began like any other, but it would mark the start of a descent into tragedy. As the night unfolded, an argument erupted, and by the next morning, their world would be shattered in ways they could never have imagined. Tonight, we unravel the heartbreaking tale of the Chen family, exploring the hidden secrets and desperate measures that led to a night of unimaginable horror. Join me as we step into the shadows and uncover the haunting truth behind the Chen family's tragic story. This is Whispers of the Guilty. On a quiet summer evening in the small town of Mississauga, the Chen family home stood as a beacon of suburban serenity. Nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac, the two-story brick house with its manicured lawn and white picket fence seemed like the quintessential picture of domestic bliss. Yet, behind the facade of normalcy, an unimaginable darkness was about to unfold. Linda Chen, a 45-year-old nurse, was known for her warm smile and kind heart. She had dedicated her life to caring for others, working long hours at the local hospital. Her husband, Peter Chen, 48, was a successful engineer whose meticulous nature and dedication to his work earned him respect in his field. Together, they had built a comfortable life for their two children, 18-year-old Alice and 16-year-old Kevin. Alice, a recent high school graduate, was preparing for her first year of college. She was an ambitious young woman with dreams of becoming a doctor, inspired by her mother's career in healthcare. Kevin, on the other hand, was a typical teenager, juggling schoolwork, sports, and the trials of adolescence. Despite their busy lives, the Chens were a close-knit family, often seen together at community events and family gatherings. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, but the Chen family harbored secrets and tensions that simmered beneath their outward appearances. Peter's demanding job often kept him away from home, creating a strain in his marriage with Linda. Linda, overwhelmed by her responsibilities at work and at home, began to feel isolated and unsupported. Alice and Kevin, caught in the crossfire of their parents' strained relationship, dealt with their own struggles in silence. The night of June 15th, 2019 began like any other. Linda prepared dinner while Peter worked late at the office. Alice was out with friends, celebrating her graduation, and Kevin was upstairs, engrossed in a video game. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional clink of dishes in the kitchen. As the clock struck 10 p.m., Peter returned home, his face etched with fatigue. He greeted Linda with a perfunctory kiss on the cheek and headed straight for the shower. Linda watched him go, a pang of sadness in her heart. She missed the days when they would talk for hours, sharing their hopes and dreams. Now, it seemed, they were merely going through the motions of a life they had built together. An hour later, Alice returned home, her laughter filling the air as she recounted her evening to her mother. Linda listened with a smile, grateful for the distraction. Kevin emerged from his room, lured by the sound of his sister's voice. The siblings exchanged playful banter, their camaraderie a brief respite from the underlying tension in the house. As the family gathered in the living room, an air of normalcy settled over them. They watched a movie, shared a bowl of popcorn, and for a moment, it seemed as though everything was fine. But the illusion of peace was shattered when Peter received a call from his boss. He stepped outside to take the call, his voice rising in frustration as he argued with the person on the other end. Linda's heart sank as she watched her husband's silhouette through the window. She knew that their financial situation was precarious, and Peter's job was their lifeline. The stress of their mounting debts and the fear of losing their home weighed heavily on both of them. She felt a wave of helplessness wash over her, unable to see a way out of their predicament. When Peter finally returned, his face was a mask of anger. He didn't speak as he sat down, his eyes fixed on the television. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, and the children sensed the change. Alice excused herself, heading to her room, while Kevin followed suit, retreating to the sanctuary of his gaming console. Linda and Peter sat in silence, the unspoken words between them creating a chasm they couldn't bridge. The weight of their troubles pressed down on them, suffocating any attempt at communication. Finally, Linda mustered the courage to speak. "Peter, we need to talk," she said softly, her voice trembling. Peter sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Not now, Linda. I'm tired." "Tired of what?" Linda's voice grew louder, the frustration she had been holding in spilling over. "Tired of this marriage? Tired of us?" Peter looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "I don't know, Linda. I don't know what to do anymore." Linda's heart broke at his words. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We can get through this, Peter. We've been through worse." Peter pulled his hand away, his expression hardening. "I need some air," he muttered, standing up and walking out the door. Linda watched him go, tears streaming down her face. She felt a deep sense of loss, as though the man she had loved for so many years was slipping away from her. She sat there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on her. Upstairs, Alice and Kevin lay in their beds, listening to the muffled sounds of their parents' argument. They both felt the weight of their family's troubles, each coping in their own way. Alice stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of the future. Kevin, unable to concentrate on his game, tossed and turned, trying to drown out the noise with music. The night wore on, and eventually, the house fell silent. Peter returned, his mood no better than before. He and Linda retired to their separate corners of the house, the distance between them growing ever wider. The next morning, the sun rose on what seemed to be a normal day, but the events of the previous night had set off a chain reaction that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. The Chen family's world was about to be shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The morning of June 16th began with an eerie stillness. The first rays of dawn filtered through the windows of the Chen family home, casting long shadows across the quiet rooms. Linda was the first to rise, her eyes puffy from a night of restless sleep. She moved through the house like a ghost, her thoughts consumed by the argument with Peter. She brewed a pot of coffee, hoping the bitter warmth would clear her mind. Alice and Kevin joined her in the kitchen, each offering a groggy "good morning." The tension from the previous night lingered in the air, unspoken, but palpable. Peter remained in bed, his heavy snores a testament to the exhaustion that had overtaken him. Linda decided to let him sleep, grateful for the brief respite from their marital strife. As the morning progressed, the facade of normalcy returned. Alice and Kevin busied themselves with their usual weekend activities. Alice had plans to meet her friends at the mall, a final hurrah before they all went their separate ways for college. Kevin had a soccer practice, his coach having called for an early session to beat the summer heat. Linda, with the house to herself, decided to tackle the pile of laundry that had been neglected for days. As she sorted through the clothes, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She tried to dismiss it as residual anxiety from the argument, but the sensation clung to her, a dark cloud on an otherwise sunny day. Around noon, Peter finally emerged from the bedroom. His expression was one of resignation, the fire of last night's anger replaced by a weary acceptance. He greeted Linda with a nod, grabbing a cup of coffee before retreating to his home office. Linda watched him go, her heart heavy with the unspoken words between them. The afternoon passed uneventfully. Alice returned from the mall, her arms laden with bags and her face alight with excitement. She chattered on about her friends, the latest gossip, and the upcoming summer plans. Linda listened with a smile, grateful for the distraction. Kevin came home from practice, sweaty and tired, but in good spirits. He grabbed a quick shower and disappeared into his room, the sound of video games soon filling the house. As evening approached, Linda prepared dinner, hoping that a family meal might help bridge the growing divide. She set the table with care, lighting a few candles to create a warm, inviting atmosphere. Peter joined them, his mood slightly improved after a day of work. The family gathered around the table, the clink of silverware and the murmur of conversation creating a semblance of normalcy. But the fragile peace was shattered when Peter's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned, excusing himself to take the call. Linda's heart sank as she watched him leave the room, the familiar tension creeping back in. She forced a smile, trying to keep the conversation going with Alice and Kevin. Peter's raised voice drifted in from the hallway, the argument escalating. Linda's hands trembled as she tried to focus on her meal, the knot in her stomach tightening. Finally, Peter returned, his face flushed with anger. "I'm sorry," he muttered, sitting down and picking at his food. "Work stuff." Linda nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The children sensed the shift in mood, their chatter dwindling to an uncomfortable silence. The rest of the meal was a tense affair, each member of the family lost in their own thoughts. After dinner, Peter retreated to his office once more, leaving Linda to clean up. Alice and Kevin offered to help, their way of trying to alleviate the tension. The three of them worked in silence, the clatter of dishes the only sound. The night wore on, the weight of unspoken fears and unresolved conflicts hanging heavy in the air. Linda finally decided to confront Peter, unable to bear the distance between them any longer. She found him in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. "Peter, we need to talk," she said softly, stepping into the room. Peter looked up, his eyes weary. "I know, Linda, I know." They talked for hours, their voices low but urgent. They spoke of their fears, their hopes, and the deep love that had once bound them together. By the end of the conversation, there was a fragile sense of understanding, a glimmer of hope that perhaps they could find their way back to each other. But fate had other plans. The peace that had been so painstakingly rebuilt was shattered in an instant. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house, followed by a scream. Linda and Peter sprang to their feet, rushing toward the noise. They found Alice standing in the kitchen, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. "Kevin!" she cried, pointing toward the backyard. Linda's heart raced as she ran outside, Peter close behind. There in the fading light light of the evening, they saw Kevin lying on the ground, blood pooling around him. The sight was a nightmare come to life. Linda fell to her knees beside her son, her hands trembling as she tried to staunch the bleeding. Peter called 911, his voice barely controlled as he relayed the details to the dispatcher. Alice stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. Minutes felt like hours as they waited for the paramedics to arrive. Linda's mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. She had heard nothing, seen nothing that could explain this sudden violence. The paramedics arrived, their efficient movements a stark contrast to the chaos around them. They worked quickly, loading Kevin onto a stretcher and rushing him to the hospital. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Linda held Alice close, trying to offer comfort even as her own heart broke. Peter drove in silence, his knuckles white as he gripped the steering wheel. When they arrived, they were ushered into a waiting room, the sterile environment a harsh reminder of the gravity of the situation. Hours passed with agonizing slowness. Doctors and nurses moved in and out of the emergency room, their faces grave. Finally, a doctor approached them, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "We did everything we could, but Kevin didn't make it." Linda's world shattered in that moment. She fell to the floor, her body racked with sobs. Alice clung to her own grief a silent scream. Peter stood motionless, his face a mask of pain. The days that followed were a blur of grief and disbelief. The police launched an investigation, the details of Kevin's death a puzzle they struggled to piece together. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses to the crime. It was as if a shadow had descended on the Chen family, leaving only questions and heartbreak in its wake. Linda and Peter's fragile reconciliation crumbled under the weight of their loss. The strain of their grief drove them further apart, each retreating into their own world of sorrow. Alice, caught between her parents' silent suffering and her own overwhelming pain, felt adrift in a sea of despair. The investigation dragged on, the lack of evidence frustrating the detectives assigned to the case. They combed through the Chen family's lives, searching for any clue that might lead them to the truth. But the answers remained elusive, the shadows deepening with each passing day. The Chen family's home, once a place of warmth and love, became a mausoleum of memories. Linda found herself wandering through the empty rooms, her mind haunted by echoes of the past. Peter threw himself into his work, using it as a shield against the unbearable pain. Alice withdrew into herself, the vibrant, hopeful young woman she had been replaced by a hollow shell. As the days turned into weeks, the community rallied around the Chens, offering support and sympathy. But no amount of kind words or casseroles could mend the broken pieces of their lives. The tragedy that had befallen them was a wound that would never fully heal. And in the darkness, the questions remained. Who had killed Kevin Chen, and why? The answers, when they finally came, would reveal a web of secrets and lies that no one could have imagined. In the weeks following Kevin's death, the Chen family struggled to find a semblance of normalcy amidst their grief. The once vibrant home was now steeped in an air of sorrow and confusion. Each family member dealt with the tragedy in their own way, yet none could escape the lingering question, who could have done this? Detective Sarah Collins was assigned to the case, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving the most challenging crimes. Collins approached the Chen family's tragedy with a determined professionalism. Her first task was to understand the family dynamics and the events leading up to that fateful night. She began by interviewing Linda and Peter separately. Linda, still in shock, recounted the argument she and Peter had had the night before Kevin's death. She spoke of their financial struggles and the growing distance between them. Peter, on the other hand, admitted to feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of his job and the strain it had put on his marriage. Both parents were consumed with guilt, each believing their turmoil had somehow contributed to the tragedy. Alice was next. The young woman, who had been so full of life and ambition, now seemed a shadow of her former self. She spoke haltingly of her relationship with her brother, describing Kevin as a typical teenager, sometimes difficult but always loving. She had heard nothing unusual that night, only the sudden shattering of glass and Kevin's scream. Detective Collins combed through the family's background, looking for any possible leads. The Chens had no known enemies, and their lives appeared to be an open book, yet something didn't add up. She decided to dig deeper into Kevin's life, speaking with his friends and teachers to see if there was something the family might not know. Kevin's friends described him as a well-liked, if somewhat reserved, young man. He was passionate about soccer and video games, and he had recently started dating a girl named Emily Parker. Emily was devastated by Kevin's death, and she told Detective Collins about their plans for the summer and their dreams for the future. However, she also mentioned something that caught the detective's attention. Kevin had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to his death. He was more secretive, often distracted, and seemed to be carrying a heavy burden. Collins followed this lead, hoping it would unravel the mystery. She discovered that Kevin had been spending time with a group of older older boys known for their troublemaking. They were involved in petty crimes, vandalism, shoplifting, and the occasional fight. It was a surprising revelation, given Kevin's otherwise clean record. Detective Collins brought the boys in for questioning, hoping they might shed light on Kevin's recent behavior. The boys were a tough group, defiant and uncooperative, but one of them, a wiry teenager named Jake, eventually cracked. He admitted that Kevin had fallen in with their group after a chance encounter at a local arcade. Kevin had been desperate for money, and they had used his desperation to rope him into their schemes. Jake claimed they had been planning a burglary on the night Kevin was killed, but Kevin had backed out at the last minute, saying he couldn't go through with it. Detective Collins felt she was getting closer to the truth. She dug deeper into Kevin's financial situation and discovered a series of withdrawals from his bank account, amounts that didn't make sense for a teenager with no job. She traced the money to a local loan shark known for preying on vulnerable youths. It seemed Kevin had borrowed a significant sum, likely to help his family with their financial woes, but had been unable to pay it back. Collins confronted the loan shark, a burly man named Tony Russo, who had a reputation for violence. Russo denied any involvement in Kevin's death, claiming he had merely given the boy a loan and was waiting for repayment. But Collins knew better. She applied pressure, using every tactic at her disposal, until Russo finally admitted to sending someone to scare Kevin into paying up. He insisted it was just meant to be a warning, not a murder. With this new information, Collins pieced together a chilling theory. The person sent to intimidate Kevin had gone too far. She needed to find out who Russo had sent and bring them to justice. Her investigation led her to a local thug named Carl Jenkins, a man with a history of violent behavior and a known associate of Russo. Collins tracked Jenkins down to a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. The confrontation was tense, with Jenkins denying any involvement and becoming increasingly agitated. But Collins had enough evidence to arrest him, and during the interrogation, Jenkins finally broke. He confessed to confronting Kevin that night, but claimed it had been an accident. Kevin had tried to run, and in the struggle, Jenkins had pushed him too hard. Kevin fell, hitting his head on a sharp edge of the garden stone, causing the fatal injury. The confession brought a sense of closure, but it did little to ease the Chen family's grief. Kevin's death was a tragic accident, a result of a desperate attempt to help his family. Linda and Peter were left to grapple with their loss and the knowledge that their son's life had been cut short by circumstances beyond their control. The community mourned with the Chens, their support a small comfort in the face of such a profound loss. Alice, struggling to cope, found solace in her friends and threw herself into her studies, determined to honor Kevin's memory by achieving her dreams. Linda and Peter sought counseling, hoping to rebuild their marriage and find a way forward. Detective Collins, having closed another difficult case, couldn't help but reflect on the fragility of life and the ripple effects of a single act of desperation. She knew the Chen family's wounds would take a long time to heal, but she hoped they would find some peace in knowing the truth. In the end, the Chen family killing was a stark reminder of the hidden struggles that can drive people to desperate measures and the unintended consequences that can arise from those actions. The Chens would never be the same, but they would carry Kevin's memory with them, a reminder of the love and sacrifice that had defined his all-too-short life. In the months following the arrest of Carl Jenkins, the Chen family faced the arduous task of rebuilding their lives. The truth of Kevin's death had provided some closure, but the emotional scars ran deep. Grief lingered like a heavy fog, affecting every aspect of their existence. Linda, Peter, and Alice struggled to navigate their new reality, each finding different ways to cope with the profound loss. Linda returned to work at the hospital, immersing herself in her duties as a nurse. She found solace in helping others, her compassionate nature a balm for her own wounded heart. Her colleagues offered support, understanding the depth of her pain. Yet every time she looked at a young patient, she couldn't help but think of Kevin. The memories were bittersweet, a mixture of love and sorrow. Peter, on the other hand, threw himself into his job with renewed intensity. The distraction of work helped him avoid the painful emotions he wasn't ready to face. His colleagues noticed the change in him. His once meticulous nature had become almost obsessive. He rarely spoke of Kevin, bottling up his grief in a way that worried those closest to him. Linda tried to reach out, but the chasm between them seemed insurmountable. Alice began her college journey with a heavy heart. She had always been a diligent student, but now her studies became a refuge from the storm of emotions she was battling. She joined support groups and found friends who understood her pain. Her determination to honor Kevin's memory drove her to excel academically, but the void left by his absence was a constant reminder of the tragedy that had befallen her family. Detective Sarah Collins continued to check in on the Chen family, her sense of responsibility extending beyond the conclusion of the case. She had seen firsthand the devastation wrought by Kevin's death and wanted to ensure the family had the support they needed. Her visits were a source of comfort, a reminder that they were not alone in in their grief. One rainy afternoon, as Linda sat by the window, watching the raindrops streak down the glass, she felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The house, once filled with laughter and life, now felt like a tomb. She decided it was time to confront the lingering pain head-on. She reached out to a grief counselor, hoping professional guidance could help her navigate the emotional turmoil. The sessions were intense and challenging, but they also brought moments of clarity. Linda began to understand that healing wasn't about forgetting Kevin, but rather about finding a way to live with his memory. She started journaling her thoughts, writing letters to Kevin as a means of processing her feelings. Slowly, she began to feel a glimmer of hope, a sense that she could find a way through the darkness. Peter, meanwhile, continued to struggle. He avoided counseling, convinced that burying himself in work was the best way to cope. His relationship with Linda became strained, the distance between them growing with each passing day. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at work, Peter came home to find Linda sitting in the living room, a look of determination on her face. "We need to talk," she said softly, patting the seat next to her. Peter sighed, his shoulders slumping. "I don't know what to say, Linda. Just listen," she replied, her voice gentle but firm. "We can't keep pretending everything is fine. We're falling apart, and it's not what Kevin would have wanted." Peter sat down, his eyes fixed on the floor. Linda took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I miss him every single day," she began, her voice trembling. "But shutting ourselves off from each other isn't helping. We need to face this together, not as strangers living under the same roof." Peter looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how, Linda. I feel so lost." Linda reached out, taking his hand in hers. "We'll find a way, but we need to be honest with each other and with ourselves. Let's start by talking to someone, together." Peter nodded slowly, the weight of his grief finally finding an outlet. They agreed to attend counseling sessions as a couple, hoping to rebuild the connection that had once been the foundation of their marriage. The sessions were difficult, forcing them to confront the pain they had been avoiding. But over time, they began to rediscover the love and support that had brought them together in the first place. Alice, too, found her own path to healing. She continued to excel in her studies, but also made time for activities that brought her joy. She joined a campus organization dedicated to mental health awareness, using her own experiences to help others. The work was fulfilling and gave her a sense of purpose. She stayed in close contact with her parents, offering them support while also finding strength in their growing resilience. The community that had once rallied around the Chen family remained a steadfast source of support. Friends and neighbors checked in regularly, offering a helping hand or a listening ear. The annual memorial soccer game, held in Kevin's honor, became a tradition, a way for the community to remember and celebrate his life. Detective Collins continued her visits, her bond with the Chens deepening over time. She admired their strength and resilience, knowing that their journey through grief was far from over. One day she brought them a small tree, a symbol of life and growth. They planted it in their backyard, a living memorial to Kevin that would grow and thrive just as they hoped to. Years passed, and the Chen family slowly began to find a new equilibrium. The pain of Kevin's loss never fully disappeared, but it became a part of their story, a chapter in their lives that shaped who they were. Linda and Peter, with the help of counseling and each other, rebuilt their marriage on a foundation of mutual support and understanding. Alice graduated with honors, her future bright with possibilities. Kevin's memory remained a guiding light, a reminder of the love that had bound the family together. The tree they had planted grew tall and strong, its branches reaching for the sky. It stood as a testament to their resilience, a symbol of hope amidst the shadows. The Chen family's journey through grief and loss was a testament to the strength of the human spirit. They had faced unimaginable tragedy, but through love, support, and determination, they found a way to heal. Kevin's legacy lived on in their hearts, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey into the heart of the Chen family's tragedy. We've explored the seemingly idyllic life of Linda, Peter, Alice, and Kevin, only to uncover the simmering tensions and desperate actions that led to an unimaginable loss. As we've seen, behind every facade of normalcy, there can lie secrets and struggles that, when left unchecked, can erupt into heartbreak and despair. In the wake of Kevin's death, the Chen family faced a profound transformation, each member grappling with grief in their own way. Through the tireless efforts of Detective Sarah Collins, the truth was brought to light, offering a semblance of closure, but also revealing the depths of desperation and unintended consequences that can arise from a single act. As we reflect on their story, we're reminded of the fragility of life and the importance of seeking help and support in times of trouble. The Chen family's journey through grief and their struggle to rebuild is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of love. Thank you for tuning in to Whispers of the Guilty. If you found this story compelling, please like, subscribe, and share. Join me next time as we uncover more chilling tales and explore the shadows where the guilty whisper. Until then, stay safe and remember to cherish the ones you love.